playlist.
The drive home sounds better.
El camino suena mejor con la Celestial 106.5. Atraviesa el tráfico de autos con el mejor playlist.
The drive home sounds better.
El camino suena mejor con la Celestial 106.5. Atraviesa el tráfico de autos con el mejor playlist.
The drive home sounds better.
El camino suena mejor con la Celestial 106.5.
No le cambie, porque a continuación comenzará un programa que bendecirá tu vida. Aquí en la Celestial FM 106.5. El siguiente programa es clasificación A, apto para todo público. Contenido E, entretenimiento.
Toda palabra o punto doctrinal emitido en el siguiente programa es responsabilidad exclusiva del programador y no de esta radioestación.
Vengan y rindámosle adoración. Arrodillémonos delante del Señor, nuestro Creador. Es hora de iniciar nuestro programa Evangelismo y Discipulado Bíblico. Abrimos la puerta para acceder a la palabra de Dios. Aquí lo alabamos.
Gracias por sintonizar Café con Hispanos, la voz de nuestra gente hispana en Carolina del Norte. Si desea contactar a nuestro conductor Gilbert, bienvenidos a Café con Hispanos, un programa que conecta nuestra fe, nuestros valores como familia, nuestros negocios y proyectos de ley que afectan a nuestra comunidad hispana aquí en Carolina del Norte. Entrevistamos al gobierno y a líderes de nuestra comunidad para dialogar sobre el trabajo que realizan en beneficio nuestro, actualidad y un sabor a dulce hogar. Somos la voz de nuestra gente hispana. Le damos la bienvenida al pastor Gilbert Pagan. Café con Hispanos comienza.
Y te agobia la vida con su mucho afán, y se llena tu alma de preocupación, y se seca la fuente de tu corazón.
You should be able to see it. La Celestial
Cuando
FM.
quieres huir porque no puedes más, porque solo te sientes entre los demás, y no hay más en tus ojos brillo y emoción, y se cierra tu boca porque no hay canción. Puedes sentarte a sus pies y de sus manos beber la plenitud que tu alma necesita. Puedes sentarte a sus pies y cada día tener una nueva canción y nueva vida. A sus pies hay paz, gracia y belleza.
Welcome to Café con Hispanos. We're here in the studio in Raleigh, North Carolina, and this show will be in English today. We are doing some English shows throughout the course of the month, and to share information with our audience, some of them who are bilingual and prefer to hear it in English, some content that we share and issues that we cover. Want to say hi to the population that is under our new tower, our expanded signal in Apex, Cary, Holly Springs, Fuquay, Willow Springs, North Carolina, and of course the existing audience in Raleigh, in Knightdale, in Clayton, and a couple of other cities in Wake County. Wanted to share with you that we did expand the signal for our radio station across Wake County. And it's not all covered, but depending upon where you are, you can hear us. We are live on Facebook as well, in La Celestial, and we're also live on the YouTube channel, live streaming. And today we want to chat with Dr. Derek Wakefield. who has done some research around Hispanic votes in general, and we're going to touch on and have some conversations around North Carolina and how Hispanics voted in the most recent election in 2024, but also in North Carolina and across the U.S. Derek, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Derek, are you there, Derek?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Give me 1 second. We're testing the audio here. Derek?
Hi, sorry, I'll keep on.
Hang on, Derek.
That's okay.
Okay, hang on.
No, el celular.
Hang on. Derek?
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, you're there. I hear you now. Gotcha.
Perfect.
Well, Derek is a has a PhD, and tell us a little bit about your background. I know you were in another state, and then you're moving to PA, from what I remember, and taking a position there. So tell us a little bit about you, and I'll ask some questions, then we'll get right into the content.
Yeah, so I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow in Emory University in Atlanta. I received my PhD from Princeton University 2 years ago. And I'll be starting as an assistant professor in Bucknell University in Lewisburg, PA this upcoming year, where I'll be actually teaching both American politics and race and ethnic politics. So I'm really excited. My personal background, I'm American, French Canadian, and Salvadorian on my dad's side. And so, even though my experience is closer to white Americans and just how I've been treated, my Salvadorian heritage and, my attachment to Latino identity has been something that I've been really exploring ever since my undergrad, when I went to a University of California, Santa Barbara, that had just a lot more Latino and Latina students there. And then in my research ever since, which really has squarely focused on what is driving patterns among Latino voters, but even more importantly, how can we have dialogues with campaigns and other groups that ensures that Latino voters are getting enough information? Because one of my arguments is that campaigns are actually really underserving us as a community. So I'm really happy to talk more in detail. But yeah, just thank you so much again, Gil, for having me on.
No, I appreciate it. And, going from Emory University, I know exactly where that is. In Georgia to what is it? What is the town you're going to?
Bucknell. It's Lewisburg, Pennsylvania.
Right.
No, so I'm my girlfriend and I
Yeah.
lived out in fairly rural areas, including in North Carolina. Actually, we were in Rockingham for a little while, but yeah. Honestly, I'm just excited to be a part of that academic community. The department is really, really nice too. They were all sending me suggestions for apartments.
Oh, that's great.
We finally found one too. So last week we signed a lease and everything. So.
Congratulations. And the focus is going to be, when you're there, you said politics, and what was the other part?
So I'm teaching their American politics class, so just like the intro course. Another course on race and ethnic politics, and actually I am doing a Latino politics class my second semester as well. So I'm really excited for that.
Wow. So American politics, race and ethnic, and then a Latino politics class. Wow. That's going to be very interesting. I'm going to go sidebar here. Are these like 4-credit courses?
Yeah, these are like,
Okay.
I want to say that it'll be 25 students per section. So, pretty standard liberal arts college undergrad.
Got it. Okay. Excellent. That's great. Well, good for you. So in our conversations that we've had, offline before, you went on the program here about the Hispanic vote, and we all know, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we know from reports and data that the Hispanic vote went toward the new administration, the Trump administration, across the country, and that vote, in collaboration with a whole bunch of other voting blocks of people.
Exactly.
Not only
was definitely a shift among Latino voters.
That's right.
Supporting Trump.
Exactly. And that allowed the current administration to also take control of Congress and also of the Senate. Again, not by a lot, but they took, basically they have three branches of government during this, as a result of this election. And I guess the question I have for you, at least one of the questions, is what do you believe drove that shift for Hispanics in particular? Because Trump gained ground in a lot of areas. He didn't, in even certain blue areas. He didn't win the blue areas, but he got enough, a percentage points, 3 here, 4 there, 7 there, 6 there, that it allowed him to basically win the election. So what are your thoughts on what drove Hispanics toward, the Republican Party?
Well, one thing he just said is important, and this is just for voters in general, that Trump didn't really make gains in a lot of traditionally liberal blue city areas or in the suburbs. It really was that he increased his margins in a lot of rural places that were already going pretty heavily towards Trump. Mm-hmm. The second more general thing is that turnout in traditionally blue areas was just a lot lower in 2024 compared to 2020 or 2016. And so when we're talking about the share of Latino voters who supported Trump, the actual number is lower than in 2020. Just simply because turnout among that group was actually was lower in 2024 relative to 2020. Mm-hmm. What also happened among Latino voters there is more or less more conservative-oriented Latinos, so people who are 40 to 60, who are more religious, oftentimes are opposed to a lot of the social identity issues that Democrats support. Those folks were mobilized by Republicans pretty effectively in the last 2 election cycles. I'm currently analyzing how that occurred. I think there's still an open question about whether these voters are more economic conservative or more social conservative. Mm-hmm. With that being said, I also think that this group of Latino Republicans, they're a consistent minority of the population, but they're also still not necessarily becoming this massively growing group. A lot of my research focuses on Latinos who are more in the middle, so those who are not Democrat. And the way I think about that is that there's a lot of Latino voters who are Democrat because they really appreciated, for example, Barack Obama's policies on DACA. Even though they had their disagreements about some of his deportation rates, ultimately the Democratic Party became a party that supports undocumented immigrants in a pathway. And so, to be sure, Latino Democrats are oftentimes described by that kind of a frame. But I think that for those who have remained independent, and that group has actually been growing significantly post-Trump, and I have a forthcoming paper that has identified that among U.S.-born Latino voters, they're actually pushing rates of 25% true independent, which is actually double compared to that among what was happening even just 15 years ago. And so this group in the middle, I don't think that they're necessarily ideological, conservative, or liberal. And this is a hunch that I'm testing in another paper that I'm writing currently, is that these voters basically are, firstly, just going to be swinging more, but they also care more about their pocketbooks. They're really just pocketbook voters. If the economy is doing well, they're going to keep the person in power. If the economy is doing poorly, they're going to kick out the incumbent. And this actually goes back to some of our really older theories of political behavior that really emphasize that an individual voter doesn't need to be super informed to know that the price of eggs is going up. And then voters make those decisions based on these kind of heuristics. But, when we're seeing high rates of inflation and underemployment among Latinos, we also think who is the most hit by the COVID epidemic? It's disproportionately working class Latino and Black folks who didn't really have the luxury to stay at home with their jobs. And so oftentimes they either were unemployed or directly under threat. And so I do think a lot about this group in the middle. Not to say that Latino Democrats or Republicans are not important to understand, but I think that we don't have a good enough understanding at what can reach this group of people who increasingly just don't think that politics, they know that politics affects them. They don't know if they can affect politics. They don't know that campaigns care about them. And unfortunately, I don't know if that's necessarily incorrect. So there's also this idea that if political institutions and campaigns are failing, I don't really blame a voter for saying, I don't want to vote, or I don't really care. As a political scientist, I think it's important to say that it really is on these organizations to make sure that people are brought into the voting base, rather than necessarily assuming, oh, these people are just going to vote one way or another. Or unfortunately, what I think happens more is that when campaigns only have so much money, Latino voters oftentimes cost a lot more on an individual election to mobilize for various linguistic and community-based reasons. But then you're leaving this entire group just by the wayside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the points you raised about a lot of the voters are being unaffiliated, is what we call them. They're in the middle. They're not Republican. They're not Democrats. They're not Libertarians. From a registered party perspective, they're unaffiliated. In North Carolina, the biggest voting bloc are unaffiliated voters. They don't want to identify with a particular party. And in North Carolina, in particular, we have open primaries. So meaning that an unaffiliated voter could go in and vote for a Democrat or a Libertarian or Republican, and then vote for a different person in the general. So some states have closed primaries where if you're unaffiliated, you can't vote in the primary. Basically, you got to vote in the general. So that said, I agree that the voting bloc and Latinos, and this is in general, I think in North Carolina for sure, I don't know about the other parts of the country, that a lot of voters are choosing the unaffiliated box so that they can and not be boxed in with a party, but also be able to, if they have open primaries, they can vote in, they could like the Democrat candidate, but they want the Republican person for governor, as an example, a Democratic person for Congress or what have you, if they're kind of on the middle, riding the fence kind of thing. Regarding the growth in the blue areas, my understanding, and I'm using New York as an example here, that New York, obviously it's a blue state. New York City is pretty blue, but my understanding is that when we look at the numbers across, and New York is one of them, across the country, that let's say Trump, and again, I don't have these concrete numbers in front of me, but I'm just using it as an example. Trump, let's say, in the last election, not 2024, but in 2020, let's say, got 5% of the New York City vote, just to give you a number. And then in 2024, he picked up 7%. Right.
Yeah,
so he, right. So again, I don't know the exact number, but the theory that I'm planting here and just discussing with you is that he made significant gains, 2 here, 3 here, 5 here. In some places, he even doubled the number. It went from 3 to 6, right, or from 4 to 8. But obviously, a lot of Democratic candidates in those areas won, but he got enough of the vote to peel off where he was able to win the Electoral College, right, and then win the presidency. That's kind of like where I was going. That and in those votes are Latinos. So now the question is, how many Latinos really voted, for Trump? I know that in certain really dense Latino areas, like the Floridas and the Texases and the Californias and, certain areas, that he got more of the Latino vote there, and from the Democrats, people crossing over to vote for him because, again, you alluded to this, that certain parties may have been focusing on other issues, right? And these are the social issues, right? And I'm not focused on economic issues, inflation, the egg prices, gas. I'm concerned about my job, interest rates, these daily issues that affect me versus the abortion, transsexual stuff, boys and women's sports, open borders. Although open borders, that's another issue. But that the Hispanic voter wasn't. They hear that messaging from, let's say, the party that wants them to vote for them. Let's say the Democratic Party. They hear that messaging, but they were like, "This is not what's going on in my life right now. What's going on in my life right now? I got to pay my rent. I got to pay my mortgage. I got to put gas in my car. I got to buy eggs." You know what I mean? And I believe the economic messaging really resonated. And you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that resonated so much that even though some of the Democrats that are Hispanic may agree with some of the social issues of the party, they said, you know what, the party, they're totally ignoring what I'm going through. And then the messaging from the party itself, they were saying, the economy is good. The border is not open. That's a lie. They were doing, and when people were seeing the total opposite of what was happening in the community. I mean, what are your thoughts, I guess, what I'm sharing with you, and like obviously in your research and the like?
Yeah, I mean, I think a general story of economic. The phrase in the political science literature is economic retrospection, but put simply, it's that, again, that voters don't necessarily need to have a lot of political information to know whether the economy is doing good or bad.
Right.
There's just things that, like the price of eggs is an indicator, inflation, but also like rates of unemployment or underemployment. Like these are really, really complicated to study from like a macroeconomic perspective, but like individual voters know how it feels right now. And so I even tend to focus more on that kind of feeling rather than like strictly looking at the numbers. I focus more on the voter level, where I think that a lot of economic pain is currently being felt. Part of it too is like, with COVID relief and the COVID stimulus checks, which from either Trump or Biden, I agreed with them. I think that they were necessary personally. That's going to increase inflation, and you're going to get the current economic situation. And I don't want to get too much into like current partisan politics because I want to approach it more from a research angle.
Sure.
But what I can say is that in 2024, during the election, so many incumbents around the world lost because the economy was not doing well. And so I think Kamala Harris had her work cut out for her, and I think that she did better than maybe expected, and still wasn't good enough. And so I actually tend to not really critique the micro sort of, they should have said this or that. With the exception being, again, I think that Democrats have sort of lost the thread in terms of how they originally built this coalition, which is around basically saying, it is important. And again, I think it's important with Democrats to recognize that they're always still going to support these socially liberal positions because that's their base. And so my advice in general, just sort of argument, is more about making sure to not lose your working class oriented rhetoric. And part of the problem is that the people who are being hired by the Democratic Party are disproportionately not coming from working class backgrounds.
Agreed.
And so I have a lot of respect for basically a lot of these more local candidates that I see coming up in a way that they're not like, the Ivy League, and I'm saying this as an Ivy League educated person. Like,
yeah.
People like me,
right,
are overrepresented in government, and so and I think that just leads to this problem where issues of affordability and of like, where are you going to be able to, make this car payment? Can your kid even go to college? Like, and I think that there's also like a fundamental argument that both parties can make about whether government should be larger and you should pay more in taxes, or whether it should be smaller and you should pay less in taxes. And I almost wish that we were talking about that, because that's a genuine debate. Like there are very valid positions across that spectrum. But I think the problem right now is that neither party is really doing the hard work of, and I will say that the Republican Party has been more obstructionist in the last 8 years, if not before. And so I really just want there to be a dialogue where we can focus both at a policy level, but even at like a campaign debate level. Like, we should have genuine disagreements about whether, like, we can make government more efficient, but I think the way that Doge did it was like with a sledgehammer. I just think that there's valid points and arguments to be made, but right now our current sort of, just the way that the parties are operating and are set up, I think that they are focused more on really riling people up. And in this case, again, I'm just going to say both parties, even though I have opinions about, my own predilections, but there's less of a desire to do the hard nitty gritty work of like, how do we fix our highway system? How do we, have trade laws that are not having workers displaced, and tariffs are not the solution. That's only going to increase economic pain. And I think that like also part of it is that when we have so much economic inequality, it's clear that there just needs to be more of an equitable, I think that a lot of America's greatness was created whenever government was investing in human capital So not necessarily focusing just on like economic redistribution, but kind of doing the things like building stuff so that people could then pursue the American dream. And I think that kind of vision, I mean, whenever Obama passed a lot of the stimulus checks in 2010 to avert the recession, the way he did that was by fixing a lot of roads. And I actually believe that kind of infrastructure is the sort of thing that Democrats and Republicans can agree on. It you know, long-term increases the efficiency of the country. It provides good jobs. And that's part of it, is you can say like, oh, maybe the minimum wage for these should be, you know, something that is a bit more appealing. I don't know. I do think that there's valid critiques from the conservative angle about government waste that, again, I think there are very like important disagreements and debates to be had about that. I just wish that we were focused more, like on that maybe more boring policy, but things that result in government doing what government should do. That's like, I'll finish this thought by saying that I think the reason so many people are increasing in their independent status and just sort of don't really think politics is worth the time is because government has been paralyzed in this sort of partisan gridlock for the last 2 decades. So like, people are not incorrect to say that the government is just increasingly not doing what it should be doing. But I still personally believe in the mission of having a government that can do these important tasks. And I just would like to focus more on these things that government can do to help people, like veterans benefits, you know, having healthcare laws that provide, and again, there's debates within each of those policy spaces, but the ultimate outcome is that Americans should be having just better lives, better outcomes, and they're not. And so when people don't trust institutions, it's like, that's unfortunately logical, given that I think government has not been doing its job to the extent that I think it should be.
Yeah, and I agree that you know, the parties, you know, in both sides have their base, and they do things and say things to rile up the base, and to get them motivated and out in the streets or what have you. Well, more one party than the other when it comes to the street stuff. But, you know, just get them, you know, they speak to their base, not the people in the middle. The Democrats had at one point, this is years ago, obviously, had been the party of the working class long time ago. And then the Republicans took that mantle. You know, won, you know, I guess the election as well among a lot of Latino men. From what I understand, they voted for Republicans in mass. The numbers, when you break them down, because they resonated with Trump and I guess his approach to the economy and business and strong arm kind of approach to things. And then the Republicans took the working class mantle, you know, honoring those who work with their hands, cut grass, you know, fix pipes, you know, just, you know, they working in the fields and the blue collar worker that provides for their family. And they took that mantle and then ran with it. You're right. And it's interesting because when you look at, and I don't get too in the weeds here, when you look at coalitions across the United States in parties, and right to your point, that many of the people who are running and calling the shots are not the people who are the working class, who are on, you know, in the trenches, who are local, you know, local candidates and the like. They look, like you say, look like you, right? Exactly. Which is so true. But when you look at on the Republican side, you look at candidates that are running across the country, you look at GOP clubs, you look at GOP state chapters, you see blacks, you see whites, you see Hispanics, you see Asians, Indians, you see Chinese, you know, and you look at the Democrats. It's fascinating to watch when you look at, when again, I don't get into identity politics here, but when you look at the parties and you look at, you know, who's in it and who's running it and who's doing stuff, one party has more of a multicultural, you know, flavor of different people, and you look at the other one, it's like, oh, that's interesting. And the other side is saying, well, we're the party of the minorities. And I'm like, not really. When you look at it, you're like, okay, it's very interesting, and we can't. We're at a point where parties are not working together. They're toxic on both sides, and everybody's in their corner, in their silos, coming out fighting during election season. A lot of the issues that are dividing us are these social cultural issues, right? And some, I have certain strong beliefs on where I stand on certain things, but I'm willing to have conversations with other people about policy, about making things better. And I think Reagan said that, if we agree 80% of the time and we disagree 20% of the time, you're not my enemy. Right. So, all right. So, we can agree 80% of the time to get something done, but the 20% could be a whole bunch of other stuff that are very passionate issues. And those passionate issues for some on both sides say, I can't work with you on the 80 because these 20 is so important to me. And I say, okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, that's your right, your choice. You can do that, but if you want to get government moving again, you have to have both parties coming together and working to kind of fix stuff policy wise. Regarding Doge, and which is a good point you raised, and Musk, and you didn't say Musk, but I did, and Trump, and the process of eliminating government waste. And sure, he's gone in there with a sledgehammer, and I agree. And people tend to forget that Musk is a entrepreneur by nature. And just look at him. I mean, all the things that he does. And Trump also is an entrepreneur. And they're used to coming in and shaking stuff up and breaking the status quo and cracking stuff. And it's just, sometimes, again, and me personally, from my, personal experience, I'm also an entrepreneur. Sometimes you need to go in and shake stuff up so bad to see what shakes out and then fix it. Versus, okay, we're going to go here piecemeal. And people are not used to that. They're not used to that happening on the political spectrum. They're used, let's have a conversation. Let's have some focus groups. Let's get some meetings together, some round tables. Let's get all these nice things, let's bring different people into the conversation, right? But people, they're not used to that. This kind of method to fix government. And and obviously the media hops on it, and they need eyeballs and they need people to watch their TV shows and listen to their radio. So I think that some of the points you raise are valid, and I'm agreeing with some of them with you. But that said, I don't know if you want to have anything to say more about that. I want to move into the voting data and stuff. Do you want to respond to that, or want to move to the next step?
Yeah, I have a quick thought.
Go ahead.
Won't be too long.
Yeah.
I think that there's very real problems with the future of the United States' budget and with balancing it. And I think with regards to that, it's people who are making more than about $200,000, and especially those making more than $1 million, their share of the taxes being paid is actually lower, relatively speaking, than to people who are making, like, say, $70,000, who really get actually screwed in our current tax system. Like, if you're making below the poverty line, of course, a lot of the EITC and other things do benefit you. But it's like the middle class is actually being squeezed right now by the fact that we do have good policies that are not having heavy taxation on the most poor. But there's also really not much taxation happening at the highest levels. Like Jeff Bezos paying net $0 in taxes is just frankly ridiculous. And I think that's something that both Democrats and Republicans are actually increasingly sort of saying, this egregious amount, we have to have some kind of a way to balance our budget. On the other side, I think that whenever you have a lot of entitlement programs, that there's not really a way to think about how to fund them long term. And we're going to hit a demographic cliff, just like Japan is right now. And I think that kind of argument really has not been animating. Paul Ryan was talking about it a while ago. I don't think that the Republican Party is really on that anymore, which to me, like,
Rand Paul
basically just want to spend and not tax, which is not good.
Spend. Yeah, no, I
and so ultimately, I think because of how complicated that gets, like with the Doge stuff, like there were so many things that were reversed almost immediately, and I do think that ultimately, like, having a professional workforce in the government is important. And we can talk about how big or small that should be, but we should have experts who are sticking around election after election and are not having to respond to politicians necessarily. Like, there's a whole argument about how if you have it where the entire thing flips every 4 years, you basically lose so much institutional knowledge. And a lot of these people also are committed to America, not Democrat or Republican. And so I just think that those civil servants right now are kind of being attacked. And certainly there's government waste. But I just, knowing a lot of those people also, they're working these jobs because they believe in it, not because they're getting paid enough. They could easily go private and make much more money than they are right now.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, I think it goes back to the issue that we're really not having conversations about the hard issues and looking at the data. You're a data guy, obviously, and I'm one, not as much as you, obviously, for what you do for a living, but I'm a data guy. I said, what does the data say? And around the multimillionaires and the billionaires, and also the $200,000 or more and the $70,000 people making that kind of annual income. What does the data say? And and let the data drive you, and then have those conversations. The same issue applies to, and then we'll move to the voting thing. But I use that as an example for my audience that. There's this conversation around whether illegals contribute more money to the economy than they take out in services. Mm-hmm. And there's conversations around that, and there's data around that is supported on both sides, that they take out more than they put in. And there's other people who are using other data and say, well, they put in more than they take out. So, having conversation unemotional with data and saying, okay, what data are you using? And this is what we're using. And then having that real conversation. The same thing with the taxes with Bezos. Is it his personal taxes or is it his Amazon taxes? Because Amazon is a company, and you got Jeff Bezos, who's a stockholder, and I'm not sure if he's an employee anymore. Is he getting a W-2? I mean,
so he was able to pay zero on both because he did have charitable donations. Right,
well, he should.
Personal finances, which I support that.
Yeah.
But then Amazon was able to abuse several tax loopholes to essentially pay $0 in taxes. And I believe in free enterprise, and I think that the American dream is built on a fundamentally capitalist system.
Yep.
I also believe in fair capitalism. Basically, I think that
pay your fair share. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I mean it's never fair, but
closer to fair, fairer. Right, I got you, and that's okay. That's fine. I understand. And again, having the conversation around hard data, right? And not being emotional about it, and saying, okay, this is what the data reveals. Do we agree that these are the data points that are accurate? Yes. We agree these 5 points are accurate? Yes. Now, how do we go from here? Some of the conversations I have, quite frankly, Derek, with people, I said, let's agree to what the facts are. Let's agree to a certain set of basic fundamental facts. We can't even get to that.
That's in the trouble.
Right. Okay, so if we can't agree that these 5 are the facts, then we can't even have the second conversation around those facts that we agreed to or we can't agree to. So we end up stopping at step 1, right? And that's the issue, like for example, of the illegal immigrants' contribution to the economy. As an example, let's talk about the facts, right? What are the facts of them participating and giving money and taking stuff out? But
there's basically, and I don't have the on balance what it would be.
Yeah.
But you both have like roughly $100 billion being paid into Social Security through taxes that these folks are never going to see. But by the same token, a lot of students in a lot of these majority Latino undocumented areas are themselves, well, actually, I guess some would be undocumented, but a large number would also be U.S. citizens. And so, again, this is where it just becomes a whole question. And but then there's very real concerns. Like I have a cousin who was teaching in a predominantly Latino area. And I think that you just need to recognize that there's going to be more resources needed for a lot of these kids who, are just, coming without the same kind of background, having parents that are facing really precarious employment, and then just not coming, from neighborhoods that are as safe. And so there's just all these negative consequences that make it so that there is a drain. And I think that's why it's also important to say, here are the facts, and then here are also where I personally believe in something, and I don't have to, we settle on the facts, I then state my opinion. And my opinion, again, is that generally I would support more government spending to help get a lot of these children into education. But that also means the money has to come from somewhere. And I think that those kinds of tough conversations are what need to happen, rather than just saying, oh, we can just fix it with a wave of a hand, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I have a lot of feelings about that. Yeah, so the talk about a little bit about the, obviously in North Carolina. I don't know if you had a chance to look at North Carolina data, but also U.S. data on why the vote went. I'll just use the word red, right? Because a lot of the Hispanics voted across the country for Republican candidates, and again, it wasn't like super red tsunami on the Hispanic side, but just enough in different areas to get them to win Trump to win the electoral vote. What were the issues that resonated there with that population, and also, what messaging resonates now going into the midterms going into 2026. We have local elections also across the country. The local, like you were saying, like local council races, commissioner candidates, either people grassroots in the community versus the Congress and the U.S. Senate. So what happened in 2024 with the Hispanic vote voting for Republicans, and then the messaging going into 2026?
So for 2024, we don't have the data yet, so okay. I can't really talk too much about with any precision. So what I can say is that in 2020, the trend was that if you were, so this is looking at Latino voters, and it's a really, really great article called Háblame de Ti by some colleagues of mine. I'll send it to you for put in the show notes. Okay. What they found was that if you were a Latino voter who cared deeply about immigration rights and about COVID or about Black Lives Matter, you voted Democrat. But if you were a Latino voter, and this is independents, Democrats and Republicans were sorted, independents would move based on their policy positions. If you were an independent who cared more about the economy and inflation, you voted Republican. And so I think ultimately that is one trend that's happening, is that during an election when incumbents like Biden were already, and so Harris, is inheriting that. Around the world, people support drop by 5 to 10 points, depending on the country. So the fact that she's having a 3 to 4 point drop, which, as you are saying, pretty much across the board, you can look at any number for Latino voting patterns, and with the exception of Florida, which I'll get to in a moment, you see about a 3-point shift from 2016 to 2020. Towards Republicans among Latino voters, and then a 3-point shift from 2020 to 2024 based on current data we're looking at. So that's the overall thing that's happening. And so I did talk about Latino independents. Those who cared about the economy tended to vote Republican. Those who cared about social issues then tended to vote Democrat. So that's one thing that happened, and I think that this election cycle is one where the economy mattered more.
Did you have that, Derek, sorry to interrupt, did you have that data in this paper by age? By, for example, you said that the people who supported BLM and COVID. So
yeah, a lot of this is that younger Latinos are going more Democratic, or Latinos are going more Republican. And a lot of this is that people who were opposed to Black Lives Matter or who do not support undocumented immigrants, they tend to be older, and those folks are becoming more Republican. And this is the second thing. So independent of these independents, who I think follow much more of an economic rhetoric story, for Latino Republicans who are conservative and are socially conservative on a number of issues. And just a side note, again, I have my own personal opinions and views, but as a political scientist, I find it crucial to meet people where they're at. And again, depending on the number, it's 15 to 20% of the Latino voter population. So also, again, we're talking about people who are naturalized citizens or U.S. born. It's just a lot of different circles that end up resulting in this. And these are folks who are just socially conservative and basically behave similar to a lot of white Republicans. And I personally view their political behavior as, they're socially conservative. They also are oftentimes anti-socialist because many of them had to flee socialist regimes. I think voting for Republican makes sense in that context. And so I do my best to understand and to validate without judging. And these folks, again, I think that they're not necessarily growing as a population, they are growing as a share of Latino voters because I think that they're actually getting pretty strongly mobilized. And then Florida. Okay.
Yeah.
If you drop Florida from the analyses, Latino vote for Republicans drops by like 4%, I think. Basically, Florida, Democrats were competing for Florida in 2012 and 2016, and then afterwards they gave up. The last time I looked, actually, Latinos are about evenly split Republican Democrat, and that's including for Puerto Rican and non-Cuban American Latinos in Florida. Like, the state is just going Republican, and it has a very large share of the Latino population. And so it's just one thing to keep in mind, that a lot of this is also because, like, Democrats are no longer really competing over Florida. They're not doing ads. They're not running nearly, like, Republicans actually ran more Spanish language ads than Democrats this last cycle. And so ultimately, I think a lot of this also goes even beyond any ethnic racial dimension, where there's just certain places where they're becoming more or less competitive. And, it's also a problem, for example, when California, New York, and Texas have the largest Latino populations, but they're really not competitive at the statewide level. So even as a guiding course, I actually personally want Latino voters to be competed over more by both parties.
That works better for us. It works better for us.
Just having more campaigns going after our votes. That's right. How we get more power.
That's exactly right. I agree with you 100% there, that they should be courting us, going after us, and appreciating our vote, and therefore we get more political power that way. I agree with you. You had mentioned before in another conversation, another podcast, that you saw that the rural areas, and that was a general statement. You weren't specific to North Carolina, but let's say the rural areas are going more conservative and more red, meaning Hispanics. Can you elaborate a little bit about that? Why that's the case from what you see? I don't know where you came up with that.
So this is again, I have observed this trend.
Okay.
I'm currently writing. One of the goals of my paper is to understand who are these Latino Republicans and also independents. And actually, I'll draw upon sociology, where there's been some recent work showing that let me take a step back. So the traditional Latino immigrant experience, or migrant experience in the case of Puerto Ricans, is, sometime in like the 1930 to 1960 period, is really when you have the first major wave of Latino immigrants. Obviously there's been Latinos in the U.S. pretty much forever. The border crossed with many of us. But still, I'm thinking about the most recent wave. That then led to a lot of family chain migration, where still the Latino population in the U.S. was still primarily people who were foreign-born, who were born outside of the U.S. But then in 2016, there's actually an inflection point where there's now more U.S.-born Latinos than foreign-born, and that proportion has skyrocketed.
2016, 2020, 2016?
2016
okay.
Was the point.
Okay.
And so this group is still not actually a huge number of voters. It's a very young group. I think I was listening to another podcast that the average age, the most common age among Latinos is 11. While the most common age among Black folks is 25. The most common age among white folks is in their 50s.
Yeah.
And so, older voters participate at higher rates. So there's a lot of these like younger U.S.-born Latinos who are sort of just growing up where they're growing up. And if they're in L.A., they're going to grow up super liberal. But if they're in, a rural area, they're going to grow up conservative. And I think it's just really this sort of honestly kind of simple story of these are people for whom their parents made the hard journey, or their grandparents oftentimes. And now they're really just American. And I think that kind of there's still things in like many, especially among like, for example, Mexican Americans in the Rio Grande Valley, like, they're super like proud of their Mexican heritage and still maintain it in a lot of different ways. But I also think that there's reasons why that kind of like sort of cowboy vaquero aesthetic would go more Republican. It's not inconsistent. But if we also think about those folks who are working, because like Border Patrol is disproportionately Latino. It's not a majority white enterprise. And so, you know, those folks are, again, people who do not, and again, many of these people are those who came through legal channels, naturalized as citizens. And, you know, I still have family members stuck all around the world trying to get into the U.S., and they've been waiting for 15 years. So I personally still believe that undocumented immigrants deserve a pathway to citizenship, but I also recognize that for folks who have been waiting in line, having people cutting that line can be something that's really frustrating.
Yeah, that's a hard argument. I mean, the discussion to have in general with people who are
no, so that's, you know, I just wanted to be clear, but also like I can understand why that would also lead people. And again, these are voters,
right?
By definition, undocumented immigrants, unless it's like a local election where they're allowed to, they're not voters. So Latino voters are going to be a group that could behave how other Americans behave, and I think it's wrong to say that, oh, just because they're Latino, they're not going to respond to all these things happening in the country in the same way.
Yeah. Do you see any messaging opportunities for 2026 or 2025 for candidates across the country, but, you know, maybe even in North Carolina, to reach the Hispanic voter? Is it a economic argument again? Is it a, depending upon where you are, a social, cultural issue? Like, for example, if we're going after rural Hispanics, and it could be in North Carolina or any other state, it could be Georgia, and you have Hispanics living there, and they're going to tend to be more conservative than some of the social issues, maybe like, you know, a good entry point to have conversations with them, and then you kind of back it up with economic and inflation and all that kind of stuff, jobs, economy. I mean, what are your thoughts on the 2025 and 2026 elections with messaging to Hispanics so that way they can get involved in the process?
Yeah, I'll say that my interpretation of both parties, especially their television ads, but also just generally their Latino outreach, I'll stay silent on like the other specific issues because I think that both parties have been engaging on the Democratic side in a lot of pro-immigrant messaging, on the Republican side, a lot of social conservative messaging. And I think that works among certain subgroups that they know who they are. I do think that among young Latinos, they're actually a very socially progressive group. And so one way to think about this is that as that population becomes a larger share of the Latino population, I would actually expect Latinos on average to be less socially conservative than we might expect them to be now, because we're focusing primarily on foreign-born older Latinos. The younger cohorts just generally are more live and let live. They're not like necessarily super progressive, but they're a lot more of the like, you know, I just don't want to hear about these kinds of divisive issues. And I think for those people, talking about how to make government work and concrete solutions, my simplest piece of advice is don't change your messaging just because you're talking to Latinos. Like, make sure that your message can be delivered. And so that might be a bilingual. If you're in a really heavily Latino area, you might have some Spanish language alongside a bilingual, alongside English. Like, try it. I think that there actually has not been necessarily enough testing of these different messages in Spanish and English. And I think just don't feel like you have to change your message to reach Latinos. What you need to do is you need to have Latinos on your team to tell you how to reach folks. And they'll, you know, I think that people on the ground know their own circumstances better than I ever will. My job is to look at the big picture. But if you're running a campaign outreach and you don't have somebody who is Latino on your staff who can talk about these decisions, you're going to end up having outreach that is not as effective at reaching the population. And so, yeah, I don't want to say any specifics because I think that both parties will have their own approaches to this.
Yeah.
But I think that there better be Latinos in the room. That's how you are going to reach the population better.
Yeah, I agree. And that you have to have Latinos who know how to do community outreach, community engagement, that knows what issue resonates with them, and how to get them engaged, get them into a room, have a conversation, those kind of things. And our grassroots group Hispano del Sur does a lot of community outreach. We teach a couple of things, and one of them is civics and public policy. And this is kind of the conversation we're having is along that track, voting, Latinos' impact on policy and our voting bloc and getting out there and advocating for their issues and at the ballot box, supporting candidates that support their values and the like. So this is along that line, and I agree. The campaign should have Hispanics, in as part of that team. And it's interesting that there are quite a number of campaigns across the country that think about Hispanics as an afterthought. And this is on the Democrat side. They take the Hispanic vote for granted. This is my opinion, for granted, like they take the black vote for granted and the working class vote for granted. Whereas the Republican side, and not all, but some, and it's probably more so that they ignore us. So it's interesting that, although the Republicans over the last election cycles have gone out and done a lot of work to reach Hispanic voters, they've really hit the ground running hard, and it's produced results. But they have seen the writing on the wall with the growing number, double-digit growth across the country of the Hispanic population. They're going to be one of the biggest voting blocs, minority voting blocs, very soon. If not the biggest one, and they're already setting up mechanisms to reach the voters. It's interesting that the young Latino voters, the 18 to 25, those are the ones that are growing really, really fast. Those are the kids of the first gen, right? Immigrants, foreign born, as you say.
Yeah, and those younger Latinos. When we're talking about immigration now, it's not nearly as much this story of families coming together. It's a lot of economic migrants, and I'm talking undocumented immigrants.
Right.
The sort of canonical group, because unfortunately with the current system, there's also there's no more this circular flow of labor where people can come work here seasonally and then go back home, and so it just creates all these sorts of other dynamics where people are kind of forced to stay where they are.
That's right. We're talking with Dr. Derek Wakefield, who has done a lot of research around Latinos in voting and the like, and he's got a couple of documents and papers out there already. He's got one that he's working on right now, about the Latino vote, and where how what we're talking about is how and why, I guess, some of the vote went toward Republican candidates and across the country, on the messaging and the like, and what resonated with the voters to get them to pull a lever for what they typically don't do, which is pull for conservative or Republican candidates. Typically vote for Democrats, but enough went over to the other side in this election season to make Trump win the election because of the economic issues, inflation, food prices, gas, things that affect us day to day, not a whole bunch of other stuff. So we were talking to Derek about this information and the like. Derek, last words for the audience, and then we'll wrap this up.
Sure. So the last thing I will say is, as we come up with elections, just at any level, and also as politics at times can feel like it's sort of swallowing our whole lives, and I know I feel that way. It is okay to sometimes turn it off as long as you vote. So just as a political scientist, my advice is, if politics is too much right now, if you need to focus on your own life, please do that. But also go vote in the next election. And that's my message.
And I appreciate that. Yeah, I will echo that, that sometimes what you hear on television, social media, and the like, it, depending upon what your party affiliation is, or if you're unaffiliated but you lean one way or the other, that you will not like what you're hearing, depending upon what side of the fence you're on, and it can be frustrating. And sometimes it's good to turn it off. And go on with life, smell the grass, right? Go to the park, listen to the radio, some soft music, just get unplugged from the political circles. You and I probably, do this a lot more than we should, meaning you and I, Derek, do this a lot more than we should.
Well, no, we're weird.
Right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Dr. Wakefield, for getting on the radio program with us here in North Carolina. And the show notes will have any links that and papers that we'll put there once you send them over. and looking forward to having you back on at some other point for some other conversation and other topics. And in the meantime, may you transition well and easy into PA, into your new gig.
Thank you so much, Gil, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. All the best.
Right, bye-bye.
Porque solo te sientes entre los demás y no hay más en tus ojos brillo y emoción.
Gracias por sintonizar Café con Hispanos, la voz de nuestra gente hispana en Carolina del Norte. Si desea contactar a nuestro conductor Gilbert Pagán, llame hoy al 919-931-4597, 919-931-4597. Síganos en nuestras redes sociales como Hispanos del Sur. Puede enviarnos un correo electrónico a connect@hispanosdelsur.com. Hasta pronto. La
mis anhelos, tú estarás siempre de primero. Y lo que busca mi alma es que solo puedas darle tu amor. Y esperaré en cada despertar, que seas mi respirar en cada instante, que cada latido que hay en mí, todo tu ser pueda sentir, que mis deseos y mis sueños siempre estés conmigo hasta el fin. Estás conmigo, que me das cuidado y abrigo, y que nadie me ama con la clase de amor que tú das. Yo diré donde esté, sin ti yo no quiero nada más. Oh, solo quiero desear que estés en cada despertar, que seas mi respirar en cada instante, que cada latido que hay en mí, todo tu ser pueda sentir, que mis deseos y mis sueños siempre estés conmigo hasta el fin. Mi
Disfruta el sol con música de fe para tu corazón.
Con mucha fe.
En La Celestial. Para un corazón roto hay un milagro de sanidad. Dios hace que cosas increíbles sucedan. Simplemente ocurren. Con nuestra música queremos darte el coraje que necesitas para creer en lo imposible. La Celestial.
Restaurante hondureño Green Banana, ubicado en el 11471 US 70 Bus, Clayton, Carolina del Norte, 27520. Puedes llamarnos al 919-243-1649. Ven y disfruta en un ambiente familiar con la mejor atención de la ciudad y nuestros deliciosos platillos. Auténticos, pollo con tajadas, baleadas, carne asada, chuleta, pescado frito, pupusas, tacos, pastelitos, sopas, mariscos y mucho más. Restaurante hondureño Green Banana. Te esperamos, orgullosamente catrachos.
Una voz de esperanza para el amor y para la paz.
La emisora que me alegra el día.
La Celestial. Cuando sientes que la vida se sale de control, es tiempo de regresar a su palabra.
Uno de mis favoritos es el Salmo 23.
La Celestial.
Si tuvieras fe como un grano de mostaza, eso lo dice el Señor. Si tuvieras fe como un granito de mostaza, eso lo dice el Señor. Yeah. Si tuvieras fe como un grano de mostaza, eso lo dice el Señor. Si tuvieras fe como un grano de mostaza, eso lo dice el Señor. Tú le dirías a esa montaña, muévete, muévete. Tú le dirías a esa montaña, muévete, muévete. Esa montaña se moverá, se moverá, se moverá. 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 Se moverá, se moverá, se moverá, se moverá. Se está moviendo, se está moviendo, se está moviendo, ya se movió. Se está moviendo, se está moviendo, se está moviendo, ya se movió. Que se mueva, que se mueva, que se mueva, que se mueva en tu corazón. Que se mueva, que se mueva, que se mueva, que se mueva en tu corazón. Que se mueva, que se mueva, que se mueva, que se mueva en tu corazón. Que se mueva, que se mueva, que se mueva, que se mueva en tu corazón. Que se mueva, ay, que se mueva, que se mueva, ay, que se mueva.
En el principio el Espíritu de Dios se movía sobre las aguas. En el principio el Espíritu de Dios se movía sobre las aguas.
Pero ahora se está moviendo dentro de mi corazón. Pero ahora se está moviendo dentro de mi corazón. Se moverán, se moverán, esas montañas se moverán, se moverán, se moverán. Esas montañas se moverán, se moverán, se moverán. Esas montañas se moverán, se moverán, se moverán.
Muévete también, muévete también, muévete también
con el Espíritu de Dios.
Muévete también, muévete también, muévete también
con el Espíritu de Dios.
Poder, poder, Jesús tiene poder.
Poder, poder, Jesús tiene poder.
Poder, poder, Jesús tiene poder.
Poder, poder,
Jesús tiene el poder.
No puede estar triste un corazón que alabe a Cristo. No puede estar triste un corazón que alaba a Dios. No puede estar triste un corazón que alabe a Cristo. No puede estar triste un corazón que alaba a Dios. Yo canto aleluya, alabo a mi Cristo. No puede estar triste un corazón que alaba a Dios. Yo canto aleluya y alabo a mi Cristo. No puede estar triste un corazón que alaba a Dios.
Cuando Cuando el pueblo del Señor alaba a Dios, suceden cosas maravillosas. Cuando el pueblo del Señor alaba a Dios, suceden cosas maravillosas. Hay sanidad, liberación, se siente una bendición. Hay sanidad, liberación, se siente el Espíritu de Dios. Aquí se siente la presencia de Dios. Aquí se siente la presencia de Dios. Yo siento el fuego del Espíritu.